Hello and welcome to the Times of India. You're watching Global Pulse with me, Neha Khanna. Is the writing on the wall for Ukraine and its President, Volodymyr Zelensky? 3 days ago, US President Donald Trump met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska in what has been described as a historic summit, one that the entire world watched with bated breath. Now Ukrainian President Zelensky is all set to meet Trump at the White House. The two leaders will subsequently be joined by top European leaders including the French President, the German Chancellor, the British Prime Minister, the Italian Prime Minister, the NATO chief and the European Commission President. Not surprising, because the stakes could not be higher. The European leaders are joining Zelensky in Washington to show solidarity with Ukraine and to push for strong security guarantees in any post-war settlement. And many believe this would be a perfect way to avoid a repeat of the shouting match we saw between Zelensky on the one hand and Trump and J.D. Vance on the other at the Oval Office. A blowout that the world witnessed with shock and horror back in February. But here's what is surely going to trouble Zelensky as well as the European leaders. Trump has already told Ukraine to give up any hopes of getting back Crimea, that was annexed by Russia in 2014, or joining NATO. After rolling out the red carpet for Putin, an event described by many as the end of the Russian president's isolation by the West and recognition and legitimacy on the world stage, Trump is now hoping to persuade Zelensky, who was notably absent from the Alaska summit, to accept a deal that would put an end to Europe's deadliest war in 80 years. While Trump's team says there need to be compromises on both sides, fact is, following the Alaska summit, Trump seems to be shifting the onus to end the war to Ukraine, even though it's a war that was started by Russia in February 2022. And how has Trump been applying pressure on Ukraine? Well, in his social media posts, Trump has said Zelensky can end the war with Russia almost immediately if he wants to, or he can continue to fight. Remember how it started? No getting back Obama-given Crimea 12 years ago without a shot being fired, and no going into NATO by Ukraine. For a long time now, Zelensky and his European allies have feared that Trump could push for a peace deal that is favorable to Russia and puts Ukraine at a disadvantage, leaving it stripped of large swaths of land. French President Emmanuel Macron has said he doesn't believe that Putin wants peace. All he wants is Ukraine's capitulation. As for the Ukrainian president, he has, for all practical purposes, rejected Putin's reported proposal for Ukraine to give up the rest of its Donetsk and Luhansk regions in Donbass. Kiev currently controls only a quarter of this area, with the rest having been seized by Moscow. And it's not just about whether Zelensky is willing to give up any Ukrainian territory. While it remains a key sticking point, another one is about security guarantees for Ukraine in a post-war scenario. Additionally, Zelensky wants an immediate ceasefire, while Putin and now Trump too are pushing for a more comprehensive peace agreement. Following his meeting with Putin, Trump, who was earlier insisting on an immediate ceasefire, has changed his position. If Putin and Trump have their way, the fighting will continue as negotiations for a larger peace deal take place. On the battlefield, Russia has been slowly grinding forward, building on its gains. and Putin is unlikely to give up that advantage. Ties between Ukraine and the United States, once extremely close, have been rocky since Trump returned to the White House. But Ukraine knows that in order to continue fighting against Russia, it needs US weapons, funding, and intelligence. So what really are Zelensky's options at this stage? Will peace for Ukraine come at a heavy cost, including loss of land? Is that now inevitable? If Zelensky continues to dig his heels in, could Trump withdraw from the peace negotiations and worse, pull the plug on the US military and financial aid to Ukraine? What will European leaders do in that eventuality? And can Trump provide ironclad security guarantees to war-torn Ukraine and ensure its protection against any future invasion by Russia?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. That was very profound. And I will say that I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal.
And today we hear President Trump say that if he were president, there would be no war. I think that would actually have happened. I confirm this because overall, President Trump and I established a very good business and trusting relationship. And I have every reason to believe that moving along this path, we can reach, and the sooner the better, the end of the conflict in Ukraine.
Do I think President Trump wants peace? Yes. I do not think President Putin wants peace. I think he wants the surrender of Ukraine. That's what he proposed. So now we'll see. Tomorrow we will have a discussion. It will be robust, and it will allow President Trump to re-engage based on what he himself has said and wished for. An expanded meeting where the Ukrainians and Europeans can be there to present their views. It's a good thing.
This war in Ukraine has been going on a really long time now. I mean, 3+ years. Hugely impacted the Ukrainians, who've suffered hugely, but it's also impacted Europe. It's impacted every single family and community in the United Kingdom. And so everybody wants it to end, not least the Ukrainians. But we've got to get this right. We've got to make sure there is peace, that it is lasting peace.
All right, so what can we expect next? Trump and Putin have met. Trump is slated to meet Zelensky and the European leaders next. Well, let's discuss this with our guests on Global Pulse tonight. Joining me on the show is Oleg Dunda. He's a member of the Ukrainian Parliament. He joins us live from Kiev. We also have with us Tobias Bakale. He's a former member of the German Parliament. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. In a moment, we're also hoping to be joined by Tatiana Kukareva, a senior journalist in Moscow. All right, Oleg Dunda, it is your country's fate that is on the line. Let me begin with you. We saw what happened in that much talked about summit between Presidents Trump and Putin in Alaska. Now we know that President Zelensky, along with a whole host of European leaders, is going to meet President Trump at the White House. Going by the reports that have emerged and a series of social media posts made by none other than Donald Trump himself, many are asking, is it now inevitable that for this war to end, Ukraine will end up paying a heavy price and will be coerced into giving up some of its land, whether it likes it or not? Donald Trump has already made it clear that Ukraine will have to forget about Crimea and NATO membership. And if reports are to be believed, Putin also wants Ukraine to give up its control of Donbass. Your thoughts? The question is, do you believe that loss of land is going to be virtually inevitable for Ukraine?
First of all, thank you for your invitation. And first of all, I would say in Alaska, Putin showed all world he didn't change his opinion, his mind, and he want to see like Ukraine will be surrendered in his hand. And it's not about Donbass. It's all Ukrainian sovereignty. And this situation, I wouldn't agree with, and I would say, no, I would say, I tell you, we will not give up. I wouldn't disagree. I would disagree with Ursula von der Leyen, who said yesterday about it's a decisive day for Ukraine. For my opinion, it's not decisive for Ukraine, first of all, because we fight for our independence, we are fighting for our dependency, we are fighting for our sovereignty, and we will be fighting tomorrow and after tomorrow. It doesn't matter what kind of opinion Trump has, what kind of opinion Witkoff has. We will fight for our country. I would say it's a decisive day for Trump, for United States, because now his current administration stands at a crossroads. And Trump needs to choose one path from two. One path is to choose situation when United States is just mediator, like Qatar, like some countries, regional leaders in the world who don't have any opinion in the region, but try to be a basic platform for negotiations. If Trump would choose this path, so future of United States will be regional leader without any rights to establish their rules and keep control for their rules. And another path is to keep their position like a big country, big player, big actor in the world who can capacities and possibilities to establish rules and keep control of these rules. It's choice of Trump. Trump and his administration, and our situation of Ukraine, situation in Ukraine will not change of opinion Trump's. We have a big support from our European partners. We have big support from our society. And Trump can change our path or our future in this situation. So okay. I would advise Trump to keep right side of history.
Stay on the right side of history. Okay. You're saying we will continue to fight for our land. Trump can't change our path. But, you know, at the end of the day, Ukraine does need the United States of America to continue fighting Russia. Okay. Oleg, I promise I'll come back to you.
Okay.
I will come back to you. Let's get a quick word in from Tobias Bakale, who's been listening in. Tobias, you know, I understand how Ukrainians feel about this. I understand where Oleg is coming from. But, you know, we've had people from the United States saying repeatedly, including on this show, it's time for Ukraine to accept the reality. Therefore, I'm going to ask you the question that I asked at the start of my show. Is the writing on the wall for Ukraine? Do you not believe that there is a very real possibility that Donald Trump could push for a deal which is actually favorable to Moscow and ends with Ukraine losing some of its land? Trump is already talking about Crimea. He's already saying forget about NATO membership. And then there could be some talk about Donbass.
I'm afraid so. But when you say, does Ukraine need to accept this reality, I would argue, what kind of reality is this? And I think this is crucial to understand. Trump is very easily influenced. And I think sometimes watching from a European perspective, it feels like Trump is always believing the reality he last met with. And I think this is what today is about. Trump might be stuck in a reality that has been presented to him by Putin, which is not the real reality, not what we're living in. It's not based on facts. It's about a, fabricated propaganda approach that this is not a war at all, that this is somehow justified by interest. Let's keep that clear. In reality, and state by the facts, started an invasion of its neighboring country. And there also the European perspective comes to the table. If we now accept that in any kind of way, this is a danger to all the other neighboring countries of Russia itself, but also everything that's in the sphere, big parts of Africa, big parts of Europe that are even not just next to Russia. And I think this is what's crucial about the meeting today. Is Zelensky is going to try, of course, persuade or make his point to Trump. But even more important, I think, is that the European leaders in, because for them, it's, as you said, it's not only about their own country. I am with the Ukrainians in that case, but I do understand sometimes it helps if there is another voice of reason in the room. And I really hope that Macron and Merz and Ursula von der Leyen are going to bring that different voice of reason to the table. And let's face it, Trump is, as I said, easily persuaded. So if we're talking about reality, yes, of course, it's a reality that Ukraine is depending on our support in Europe, but also on support of the US. But it's also part of that reality. Neo-colonial power on the rise, and that's Russia that tries to grab a neighboring country. And I think this is important to bring back into this perception of reality to Trump, and to understand that we talk about. I mean, if I hear now people talking, accept the reality of territory swaps. What do they mean with territory swaps? What's Russia giving up? What is Russia bringing to the table? So if there is a deal, we need to talk about a deal. Just stating that Ukraine is going to lose some territory, that's not a deal. Mm-hmm. That's Russia, their war they waged against a neighboring country. And I think this is important to understand. So if we're talking about reality and making a deal and whatsoever, first step now needs to be moving away from the idea that a one-sided victory has anything to do with a deal.
Okay. A one-sided victory cannot be a deal. Just to clarify, Ukraine needs to accept the reality. Those are not my words. Those are, words of most in the Trump administration. Before I take this back to Oleg Dunda, let's play out for our viewers an excerpt from that extremely fiery exchange that took place at the Oval Office in February of this year, when Zelensky, many said, was ambushed by Trump and his deputy, J.D. Vance. Let's see what happened.
You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's
with
back
all
to
respect to
you.
your
Far
country.
more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once?
A lot of times.
This war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days, I heard it from Putin. In 3 days.
Now, it was a lot worse than that. We only played a short part of it. We all remember watching it with horror, frankly, that blowout and that shouting match at the Oval Office with J.D. Vance repeatedly asking Zelensky if he had thanked the United States of America enough for its support. Now there's going to be another meeting between Zelensky and Donald Trump. And this time, a whole posse of European leaders are going to join them a bit later. Some believe that is actually being done not just for the European leaders to show solidarity with Zelensky, but also to ensure that there is not a repeat of that episode that we saw back in February. But we all saw what happened then, and we saw what happened over the weekend in Alaska. Are you genuinely not concerned, Oleg, that Donald Trump at the end of the day is a man who seems to admire Putin, that's what many believe, who has clearly granted him legitimacy and recognition on a global stage, singularly or single-handedly ending his isolation by the West, and now seems to be pushing for a deal favorable to Moscow, whether Ukraine likes it or not. And I know you said earlier that Donald Trump can't make us change our mind. But let me remind you, Oleg, that Ukraine does need financial and military support from the United States of America to continue fighting Putin and Russia. Can it do it alone, or can it do it just with European support? If Trump were to pull the plug on all this aid tomorrow?
First of all, we had for now a result of conversation with our European partners, and result of this conversation was European Union, European partners agreed to finance weaponry supply from United States. So in this situation, we don't need a big financial support from United States. About military suppliers, about military. For last 3 years, our military ideology on the battlefield was changed. If in 2022 we had military ideology of 20th century in the time of Cold War, now we have on our battlefield military technology of 21st century, when drones, very cheap drones, could strike very expensive, old, obsolete military weapons like tanks, like artillery. And in this situation, Ukraine doesn't need to have a lot of military supply from United States. Yes, of course, we have a crucial point in military sphere. I would call it two crucial points. First of all, it's satellites grouping, satellites supporting, because now Musk, not United States, but Musk control weapons. I would say this is two crucial military support in which we need from United States. In other military support, in other military instruments, we can produce ourselves, or this military could be produced in European Union in this situation. And I think in several months we will change the situation, and Ukraine will be producing more our military weaponry, more our weapon drones and so. In this situation, every day we will become more a dependency in military sphere.
Okay, let me take this to Tobias. Tobias, with all due respect to our Ukrainian friend, is Oleg really being realistic in his assessment when he says, yes, we can fight this war without the support of the United States of America? I think it is very well established that Russia continues to make advances on the battlefield and has a clear advantage on the ground. At the moment, Ukraine may have had a few successes with its drone strategy, but that's really not the same as trouncing the Russian forces in the war. Fact is, they do have the upper hand. So I'm going to ask you this question. Is there not a real fear that, knowing how mercurial and unpredictable Trump can be and how desperately he wants to see an end to this war, there is a very real chance that if tomorrow Zelensky says, we are not giving up an inch of our territory, whether it's Crimea or Donbass, Trump could turn around and say, fine, we are out. The United States of America is out. He withdraws from the negotiations. He pulls the plug on all the military and financial aid that's going to Kiev. And then Ukraine is left facing Putin by itself with support from the Europeans. I don't think anybody can argue at this point that that's going to be enough for Ukraine.
I think this is a danger, but, and I think this is the big but in this calculation, Ukraine fought off the Russians and this invasion by Putin way braver and way more successful than I think basically any military analyst, strategist, and whatsoever predicted in the early days of this invasion. So when the full-scale invasion happened in February 2022, I mean, the discussion was whether it's a few days, whether it's been 3 years. But I think the truth also is if Trump declines further aid, military aid, it's also the truth if any kind of our European and American has an international hesitation, and we had several steps where we hesitated to deliver arms, and I think many of those hesitations, if not all, were a mistake because Ukraine paid for them. Ukrainians, and above all the soldiers on the front line, with their blood and with their lives for this hesitation. And I think this is what's going to happen if Trump declines further support and further aid for Ukraine. I don't want to predict whether Ukrainians will be able to fight. They have been brave and they have been fighting it way better, as I said, than anyone thought. But there is a price if Europe, if the US hesitate to support. And this is crucial to understand. I also believe it's in our interest to support Ukraine, because let's play that through to understand, above all for US Americans and European citizens. This is not only, it is about international order, it is about solidarity with Ukraine, but it's not only about that, it's also about European and US military interests, of course. If Russia realizes they are able to grab for any world, if they want so, without any kind of consequences, or with maybe 2 or 3 years of isolations, and then they get the red carpet and whatever they're asking for from the US president again, then this is the decline, this is the end of the rule-based order around the world. It is the decline of any small military that's depending on international security and international solidarity. So there is more at stake than just, and please forgive me for phrasing it that way, for just Ukrainian security, for just the lives of Ukrainians, which is already important enough. So to come back, long story short, I believe the Ukrainians would be able probably to fight it off way better than we think. But there's a price to pay for the Ukrainians, above all for the Ukrainians, which will backfire in a middle or short or long term towards the Europeans, towards the US interests, if we don't support Ukraine for just peace, just if you want to phrase it like Trump. And last point on that, to understand, and Zelensky tweeted, but said it today, Trump has the power to put the hard facts on the table, to move Putin for a hard deal. But I think it's important to not be, well, alert or whatever you want to call it, persuaded by Putin, but actually be brave about it. Ukrainians have been brave for 3 years. They're going to be brave even if we decline further, or if the US would decline further support. But now it's time for Donald Trump to be brave.
Okay, it's time for Donald Trump to be brave. It's interesting you put it like that, because frankly, the question many are asking is, are we going to see Trump change Putin's mind, or is it going to be the other way around? Do we actually see Putin influencing Trump's position on this war? I think that is the real worry for Ukraine and indeed for the rest of Europe. So let me bring in Oleg at this point. Oleg, couple of questions.
I think
as a Ukrainian,
in
if I could just put my question to you, Oleg, I wonder as a Ukrainian what you made of the Alaska summit, the fact that Trump rolled out the red carpet for Putin, even applauded him on the red carpet, and seemed to agree with him on a whole lot of things. That's one. And two, my question is that while Tobias is right in pointing out that this isn't just about Ukraine's security, it's also about the larger security of Europe, because many say that today it's Ukraine, tomorrow it could be other European nations. We don't know where Putin will stop. But when Ukraine talks about ironclad security guarantees that it wants from Donald Trump, what do you think those might look like without a membership of NATO, which Trump seems to be ruling out?
First of all, in my personal humble opinion, Trump chose in Alaska role of a mediator, not advocate of Ukraine or ruler of Western democracy, but mediator, like, I don't know, like Qatar, something like that. And mediators, he tried to make comfortable conditions for participant of this not negotiation, this conversation, this situation, and I think he needs Trump. He needs to walk a long road to change his opinion and to understand real goals of Moscow. But in Alaska, in time of his press conference, Trump told very clearly his real goal. First of all, he tried to threat Europe, and he blamed Europe in this war, first of all. And the second point, he told, for negotiation for peace road, we need to establish new security order in Europe. Like it was in Cold War in 80s, when United States and Moscow they had dealing about ordinary weaponry in Europe. It's about to divide Europe to establish new Russian influence in Europe. It's more dangerous than to surround Donbass in Ukraine. And this is why I understand warning of European political leaders, and why they want to have a conversation with Trump today. About guarantee, I had last days, I had a lot of discussion with my European partners, colleagues, and nobody understand what Witkov meant about security guarantee. And I noticed yesterday even Rubio didn't understand what Witkov meant in this situation. In time when Witkov told about fifth article of NATO, in that time Rubio answered, I don't understand what does it mean, and we don't have obvious understanding what kind of guarantee we can propose Ukraine. We are working on this process. In this situation, it just maybe Witkov tried to say his personal opinion in the situation. But what we totally understand, Russia can be the part of this guarantee.
Okay, let me put that question to Tobias. Before we go across to Tatiana, who joins us now. Tatiana Kukareva is a senior journalist who joins us from Moscow. Thanks very much for being with us, Tatiana. Give me just a moment and I will be with you. Before that, Tobias, I want your response to what Oleg said. He's actually being candid and says nobody really seems to understand what those security guarantees for Ukraine that everyone is talking about could actually look like. My question is, Trump is now saying, forget about NATO membership. If that is indeed the case, then what kind of security guarantees do you think the Trump administration can really offer Ukraine at this point in time? And, will any of that be enough to ensure that Putin does not launch another invasion of Ukraine in the future?
That's a very good question. I think we need to put it a bit in context. I mean, there were security guarantees by the US, by Great Britain, by France, and by Russia through the Budapest Memorandum, and obviously not profound enough. So I think NATO membership would be appropriate due to one reason. If Ukraine would be a member of NATO and would be attacked, and NATO would not help Ukraine, this would mean basically because the core of NATO is we promise each other if one of us is being attacked, everyone is going to join in to support the cause of defending that nation or that partner or that member of NATO. So it needs to be an equivalent. It needs to be a promise that is, because it's a strong promise and we make that promise, but because if we break the promise, it has consequences for the rest of Europe and for the US as well. So I think this is the important part. So this is where NATO membership would be suitable. European Union could be suitable as well, because also the European Union has that promise of defending themselves. But of course, the European Union excludes the US wants to join in any kind of those security guarantees. They need to try something new, probably. But I think this is crucial to understand. It needs to be a promise that is so strong that it's actually hurting the security guarantees of the rest of Europe and the US itself, and their security going to be broken. And I think that's also important for Putin to understand.
Okay, you're saying NATO membership would be desirable. I'm sure Zelensky will agree with you 100%. But the fact is that Trump does not seem to be in the mood to grant Ukraine NATO membership. And some would argue that perhaps the primary reason why Putin invaded Ukraine in February 2022 is because of the whole threat of NATO moving further eastward that was looming large. Okay, let me bring in Tatiana at this point. Tatiana, we saw what happened during the Trump-Putin summit in Alaska. In a few hours, President Zelensky is going to meet President Trump at the White House, and then the two leaders will also hold talks with other European leaders. My point is, how do you see this panning out? And how do we really hope to see a breakthrough and an end to the Russia-Ukraine war, given that the entrenched positions on both sides don't really seem to have changed at all? Putin wants all of Donbass region and wants Ukraine to give up control. Trump is now telling Ukraine, forget about NATO membership, also forget about getting back Crimea. And Zelensky says, we are not going to give up an inch of our land.
Well, it's interesting that you say that Trump now says that NATO membership has been off the table, while it was never really on the table to begin with, and he's also said it quite a few times up to now. Look, in all honesty, I don't believe that we can still be in that paradigm where it's really a two-sided conflict. It never was. This conflict didn't happen because there was a really big problem between Moscow and Kiev. It was, as you said, and some would argue, but it's not about arguing. It's a fact that NATO had been expanding gradually, despite previous guarantees that it wouldn't. And there was a serious threat to Russia. There was also the question of indiscriminate shelling in the Donbas region and the people who want it out. So right now we have a situation that happened in the first place. It happened because Ukraine was being overwhelmed by lethal military aid back in 2022. We can't deny this. I see Tobias, shaking his head. However, you can't deny this. This is all in Western media. You can look through Western media reports about just how much lethal aid was put into Ukraine back in the beginning of 2022, before the conflict erupted officially, so to speak. You need to look at the facts and understand this was never between Moscow and Kiev. There were other parties involved. There were other parties involved from the very beginning, back in 2013, when this thing happened on Maidan in Kiev. So, in order to come to any sort of conclusion of this crisis, the negotiations need to happen between the parties that are primarily involved. And unfortunately, Ukraine has been a proxy for, first of all, the Democratic administration back in the US. So now Trump is doing the negotiations, and it makes every sense in the world.
Okay,
And
you're
what
calling...
Vladimir
Okay, go
Zelensky
ahead.
wants or does not want, it doesn't really have that much of an impact, because he has not been bankrolling this war. And if Ukraine right now ends up on its own in this conflict, I do believe that even Tobias and everybody on this panel understands what it's going to come back to.
Okay, so it's interesting you say that Ukraine has been a proxy in this war all along. I think some might agree with you on that this was essentially a war between the United States and Russia, but then there is a counter argument to it, Tatiana. The other point of view is that, Russia has violated the territorial integrity of a sovereign nation. It first annexed Crimea, then it launched this invasion in 2022. Putin wants the Donbas region. And who is to say that if the front lines were to be frozen today with Zelensky agreeing to give up Donbas, Putin would not launch another invasion of Ukraine in the future, because his larger goal, according to many, is to ultimately have control over all of Ukraine. And then there are those who say, no, it's not just about Ukraine. He wants to resurrect the Soviet empire. So he's not even going to stop with Ukraine. It's Ukraine today. It's going to be other European nations tomorrow.
Well, look, I don't want to entertain conspiracy theories, because this is generally has nothing to do with journalism to begin with. But let's put it this way. This has never been about freezing the front lines. It is not about the territory. It hasn't been about the territory. It is about security, and the security, not just the security. We're talking about, security guarantees for Ukraine. What about security guarantees for Russia? What about guaranteeing the security of Russian borders?
But
Russia, what about, look,
Russia is going because Russia is waging a war in its neighboring country. I mean, all of that.
Because that country was inundated by American arms
to bring in all the chaos we're used in the last 20 years. But there is one crucial difference. Russia invaded Ukraine. So even if you would like to talk about the last 10 years, where I majorly disagree with many things that you try to mention and bring into the debate,
You disagree with the facts about
There
it.
is a where this conflict moved away, and where all those talking points of this is a proxy war whatsoever won't work anymore, because it is not a proxy war, because Russia did a full-scale invasion on its neighboring country. So all those talking
Because
points
there was a
don't
threat
work
of
anymore.
full
No, there was
scale.
no
Again, why do you say
promise
that?
So,
ever.
Why do
Tatiana,
you
You
say
know
that?
There is
Again,
no treaty.
why?
There is no legal binding treaty, but there is a legal binding treaty of the Budapest Memorandum of Russia accepting the territorial integrity of Ukraine. That was broken over 10 years ago. But even if we
And
don't
the promise of
go
non-expansion
in
of
tough way,
NATO
there is
was
okay,
turning
okay.
3
So,
broken
years
when
Tatiana,
ago.
this is what
There was
Tobias
not
is saying.
such a treaty.
Let me just reframe this, and then Tatiana can come in there. What he is saying is that it is Russia that invaded Ukraine first in 2014 and then again in 2022. Russia is the aggressor, so Russia has no business to talk about its own security guarantees. And let's say that tomorrow there were to be an agreement that there would be no NATO membership for Ukraine. That should be enough of a security guarantee for Russia. But can Russia then give a guarantee that there will be no future invasion of Ukraine?
Look, what I don't quite understand in that argument, well, first of all, is why are we downgrading everything to do with this potential resolution of the crisis back to NATO membership? It was never on the table. Donald Trump has been very clear, it was never on the table. Even the NATO chief himself has said that was never on the table. Why are we still talking about it being on the table is beyond me. But let me remind you, and let me remind Tobias, that the people of Crimea voted to join the Russian Federation. That is a fact. I actually grew up in Crimea. This is my region that I love dearly, and I know
Tatiana, there
the
were also
people
referendums
around me.
held in Donetsk and Luhansk,
Exactly.
in September of
Yes.
2022. But
Yes.
there are many
Yes.
questions. There are many questions over
No, but look, but you're
the
forgetting
fairness
about
of those
them.
referendums.
Very
Many call them a
conveniently. Look,
sham.
you're
Okay.
forgetting about everything that happened before the actual invasion, and it's a very convenient position. I understand it.
No,
However,
we
let us
don't.
please
This is a
remember
convenient
about
point to make
Okay.
the
for you
people
to just
making a
Okay.
choice
We have
and
to.
having a right to
just
make
throw
a
in that we
choice.
forget about it. In the
Yes, it is
contrary,
about people. It isn't just about land at the end of the day. And that is what we have to remember, that in this war that has gone on for 3.5 years now, tens of thousands of people have been killed, millions have been displaced. That is the reality of this ugly war that has gone on for way too long. And I understand that there are entrenched positions on both sides. This is a very complex issue, but at the end of the day, we really need to be concerned about the people who've been suffering for the last 3.5 years and continue to do so. I think the
Not
entire
for the
world
last 3.5
wants
years.
to see an end to the war and the suffering of the people. Really, I think that's what this is about. On that note, I would like to thank Tatiana Kukureva, Tobias Bakali, and Oleg Dunda for joining me on Global Pulse. Thank you so much to both of you for joining me on the show. Let me now go across to Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary of India. Sir, thank you very much for joining me on Global Pulse. Once again, great to have you on the show. Of course, it's impossible to get any sort of an agreement when you have Russians and Ukrainians and Europeans on the show. But let me ask you a straight question, sir. We saw what happened during the Trump-Putin summit in Alaska. And a few hours from now, Zelensky is meeting Trump at the White House. And then there will be confabulations with other European leaders too. The question is, sir, how do we expect to see a breakthrough in this war when there doesn't really seem to be any change in the entrenched positions of either side? Putin seems to want Donbass. Trump is telling Zelensky, forget about NATO membership, forget even about Crimea. Zelensky says, no way, we're not giving up any of our land.
It depends who has the cards in their hands. I mean, Zelensky can say whatever he wants, but what cards does he have? He's totally dependent on Europe. He's being totally guided by Europe. He's not in a position to take any independent decision with regard even to his own country. And earlier, he was totally dependent on the United States and still continues to be dependent, because if United States walks away and stops supplying of arms, and more importantly, intelligence information, real time, then I think Ukraine militarily is probably finished. So the cards are really with Putin, with Russia, because they have incorporated all these four oblasts formally into the Russian Federation. They have made advances on the ground. Largely, they have achieved what they sought to achieve. They have weathered the sanctions, although, of course, this has been painful. And if tomorrow sanctions are lifted and things become normal, they can gain a lot from this. So they would have an interest also in terms of finding some way out of this. And so far as Trump is concerned, he has made it quite clear that he wants a solution. He wants a breakthrough. That breakthrough is not going to be easy, because the Europeans are there in strength. And if you see the last communique they have issued, they have gone back to their entrenched positions, which they have taken right from the start, that they'll continue to arm and support Ukraine, and there can't be any change in territory by force, and that the doors to NATO membership should be kept open for Ukraine, etc., etc. They are feeling left out because, and I understand their position, it's a European conflict, and Europe doesn't have a seat at the table. And decisions are being taken with regard to a European conflict by United States and Russia. It's a huge, huge geopolitical slap in the face of Europe, and it will dent Europe's geopolitical role globally very seriously. So I can understand their concerns, but rather than seeking this opportunity where the Americans are now trying to find some solution, and Russia, under certain conditions, is willing to do so, they should have joined the process rather than actually impeding this as much as possible. Now, I don't know where it leaves them. It's a contradictory position. They say they want a solution. At the same time, they're taking a position against any solution. So they can't have it both ways. Now, with regard to what happens in the conversations in Washington, I think Trump is in a very difficult position because whatever his instincts are, whatever he wants to achieve with Russia, he cannot really put Ukraine under the bus and Europe under the bus. At the end of the day, if he follows that course, he will be in a very difficult position to answer to the charge that you have actually weakened Europe. You have weakened yourself against Russia. You've given Russia a big win. And what have you got in return? Therefore, and then, of course, he has to manage Europe. Europe maybe at this moment in a bit of a disarray, etc., etc. But Europe cannot just be pushed aside. They are big countries. They have great experience in diplomacy. They have all joined hands together, the senior ones, in trying to assert themselves. He has to give something to the Europeans too. So let's see what happens. It's not an easy thing for everybody, either Russia or Trump or the Europeans.
It's certainly not going to be. It's a difficult one, isn't it? But just to play the devil's advocate, you of course are saying that Zelensky hardly has any cards and Europe is feeling left out. And it is clear that, Ukraine cannot fight this war on its own. It needs American support. But, I think the fear in Europe is that today Ukraine agrees to give up some of its territory, whether it's Crimea or Donbass, and there is no NATO membership for it. Who is to say that Putin will not rearm, regroup, and launch another invasion of Ukraine going forward. And then the fear is that today's Ukraine, could it be other nations tomorrow? Because this is a man who still fantasizes about resurrecting the Soviet Empire.
Total nonsense, complete nonsense, complete nonsense. On the one hand, one has seen that Russia has not been able to achieve its objectives easily, even during the special military operation with limited territorial objectives in mind. They don't have actually full control over Donbass and neither over Zaporizhia or Kherson. They're having very have great difficulty in actually capturing territory. And it has it's been said all this while that Russia is weak and that Russian military weakness has been exposed, etc., etc. On the other hand, the narrative is what you just said, that he's going to attack Europe tomorrow and he's going to recreate the Soviet Empire. I mean, people who say they should be clear in their mind. Is Russia weak or is Russia so strong that their own security in Europe is being threatened by Russia? It's not the case at all. I mean, Russia can't even take it from me. They're in no position, and neither do they want to, I think, take the whole of Ukraine. They have certain specific goals with regard to eastern Ukraine, Russian-speaking part of Ukraine, which has historically been part of Russia. It's a different matter that after the breakup of the Soviet Union, Ukraine became an independent country with borders which were actually defined by the Soviet Union itself. It's not as if these are some historically inherited borders of Ukraine. These are borders that derived from the map that was drawn up internally by the Soviet Union. So, and then when you talk about change of borders and this and that, I mean, look at Yugoslavia. Does it exist anymore? or if you narrow it down, when it comes to Kosovo, hasn't the map been changed with regard to Serbia? So, I mean, if you look at Syria, what is happening there? The country is just breaking up. In Iraq, also the northern part of Iraq, it is sort of more or less independent. So whose handiwork has this been? It's certainly not Russia. So I mean, all this rhetoric about inviolability of borders, no violation of the UN Charter, and etc., etc. I think people who use these arguments should do some introspection as to who has been doing it all these years. And frankly, as I repeat, this is complete nonsense that Russia will take on a NATO country when they can't even handle Ukraine. Here's a proxy war. NATO is not fully directly involved, and they're not giving everything to Ukraine because they don't want to have a conflagration with Russia, which may turn into a nuclear war. So they are, in a sense, also holding themselves back. But tomorrow, if Russia actually attacks a NATO country, and then Article 5 gets operational, then Russia has a huge problem. Look at the disparity in economic power, in military power between NATO and Russia. So this is a scenario with the aim still to see if they can militarily defeat Russia and unseat Putin from power.
Unseat Putin from power. That would be a tall order. But sir, I can't not ask you about the India question. Now, one big reason why India was watching the Alaska summit very closely is because we don't know if those additional 25% punitive or secondary sanctions are going to be imposed on us, by the Trump administration. And just today, Trump's trade advisor Peter Navarro has, in an interview, said India's oil lobby is funding Russia's war machine. And you have posted on X, this is a vicious attack animated by India hate. What's going on with the Trump administration? They're acting as if it's not Russia but India that invaded Ukraine. I mean, has the Trump administration lost all sense of rationality here?
I think so. Certainly Peter Navarro has. And Trump also is wrecking the India ties by taking the position that he has. It's no longer an issue of tariffs. He has broadened his grievance against India and his attacks against India by bringing in the whole question of India's relations with Russia. And the absurdity of this is he's doing it at a time when he's improving relations with Russia.
When he's rolling out the red carpet for Putin.
Yeah, exactly. So it doesn't make sense. And Putin said at this joint press conference that after Trump came to power, there has been 20% increase in trade between US and Russia. And then, of course, there's China, which is the biggest buyer of Russian oil and gas. And he's not talking about any penalty tariffs on China. And then, of course, his provocations with regard to Pakistan and everything else. It's very difficult to discern why he's doing that and whether he's properly calculating the geopolitical consequences of this and the damage he's doing to not only US interests, but India's interests too. After all, we have become a major partner of the United States in so many areas. And we are in a position to mutually help each other and actually help the United States to maintain its primacy in certain areas, as well as build ourselves, modernize ourselves with greater cooperation with the United States. So, and then there's the whole issue of Quad and Indo-Pacific and everything else. I mean, he can't have it both ways, or the US can't have it both ways, that China is the principal adversary. And look, what did he say publicly in his interview with Fox News? That one of my reasons why I want to settle with Russia is I want to. So if that is so, then why is the relationship built with great effort for the last 20 years between India and United States? It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense at all, sir. I think we can all agree that Trump has dealt very heavy blows to this relationship, the India-US relationship. But let me ask you this. It is very clear that Trump is being downright hypocritical on this issue. As you just pointed out, Putin has mentioned that Russia's trade with the US has gone up 20% since Trump came into the White House for the second time. We know that Trump has extended the tariff truce, I beg your pardon, with China, the largest buyer of Russian oil. And Trump, who had threatened Putin with very severe consequences if there wasn't a ceasefire at the end of the Alaska summit, is now saying, I had a great meeting and it was a very productive meeting and forget about a ceasefire, let's have a more comprehensive peace deal. So he's done a U-turn on all of those issues, and yet he continues to punish India, like you said, at a time when he's rolling out the red carpet for Putin. He's ended his isolation by the West and granted him legitimacy on the world stage. So I'm going to ask you this question. Apart from the fact that it's downright hypocritical, do you believe that those additional 25% tariffs are likely to kick in on the 27th of August? Because so far we have no indication from the Trump administration as to what their thinking really is post the Alaska summit. At the moment, it really just seems to be all up in the air. And also, the American delegation that was supposed to arrive in India on the 25th of this month for the 6th round of talks on a trade deal, they have postponed their visit.
I don't think that he will operationalize his threat. He'll keep it hanging in the air. He already gave an indication of that in his interview with Fox News, that since he's talking to Russia, he doesn't think he will need to do this. Maybe he'll wait for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, meaning he will see how the entire process of negotiations with Russia goes and what results he can obtain from this. Now, if the conversation between Russia and the US collapse, then I think he could do anything. Then he'll have to take a view on China too. But I think he'll keep this threat hanging in the air over us, and he will use this threat to extract whatever he can in terms of better terms on the trade side from India. he wants to have a big win where he can tell his base that just like he browbeat Europe and Japan and others to give him a one-sided deal, he can push India also to give him that kind of an opportunity to brag to his base that he's brought India down to heel, because his rhetoric on India has been so exaggerated and so blown up that we are the tariff king and everything else. Now, he can't have a balanced agreement, a fair agreement, where there's give and take on both sides, where he can't say that I have won. I have brought India down to his knees and made them accept what I wanted. That's why he's holding back. His ego is hurt. He's personalized the whole thing,
Yes.
unfortunately.
Many believe he has acted out of pique. He was very pissed off when India declared that he had nothing to do with the ceasefire with Pakistan after Operation Sindoor. But, you know, that apart, there is another school of thought on this, and I wonder what you think. There are those who say that his punitive tariffs on India and invective against India have little or nothing to do with trade or Russian oil. It's all about Pakistan and Trump's own vested financial interests in that country, whether it is his family's cryptocurrency deals with Pakistan or his interest in those so-called oil reserves and rare mineral earths in Pakistan. What's your take on that?
How many parts of the world does he want to explore with regard to rare earths and stuff like that? I mean, US itself has a lot of rare earths. And even if, for example, they found some rare earths, of course, there are a lot of them in Latin America and not in Russia. Russia, in fact, has proposed to the Americans that we can offer you this also. In Ukraine, he wanted also access to rare earths. So how many countries does he want to have access to? But that apart, tomorrow, let's say you discover some rare earths, then what do? How long does it take actually to actually extract them, and the process of extraction economically is going to take years. And if it was that easy and that simple, he could do it in the United States itself. And then, of course, the fact that Balochistan is a very troubled area. So does he want to come back again, if not quite Afghanistan-like, but nevertheless, for security reasons, come back into this highly destabilized, violence-prone region? And then finally, if the rare earths and everything else and oil were such a big thing in Pakistan, how is it that China, which actually has Pakistan under its thumb, and through the BRI, CPC, Gwadar, and everything else, they have been trying to exploit as much as they can Pakistan for their own economic needs? Why is it that they've never talked about exploring oil in Balochistan or rare earths? I mean, they've talked about copper mines in Ainak in Afghanistan,
Yes.
which is extremely difficult in terms of access. But in Pakistan, they have access. They're there. Their security chaps are there also to some degree. They've never talked about it. So this is just I think this is just I don't know, how can I say? There is no reality to this. Yes, in terms of this crypto council, National Crypto Council that Pakistan has set up, there I think the field marshal, so-called, he's played his hand and given some entry into the entourage of Trump to come and benefit from some kind of arrangement to cooperate with this National Crypto Council, which would then mean that a lot of money can be filtered out of Pakistan to the advantage of these private entrepreneurs. And this is a good deal for him. Maybe that's the reason, but I don't think that his relationship with Pakistan is developing, or he's exploiting that because he has India in mind. I think he's doing it.
Fair
for
point.
business
But
reasons.
you don't disagree that he's doing it for his own vested interests, and I think we can now all agree that nobody plays America and Trump better than Pakistan does. But sir, final question before we let you go: could you stick your neck out for us, since that all-important meeting between Zelensky and Trump is going to take place? Do you believe we are likely to see a ceasefire and an end to this war in the foreseeable future? The war has gone on for 3.5 years. Trump had promised to end it within 24 hours. Now he realizes it's a much bigger challenge than he had ever expected it to be. But do you believe Trump can still deliver on this?
See, on the question of ceasefire, he himself said quite clearly, and Rubio has expanded on this, that the goal is not ceasefire, because ceasefires are inherently unstable, they can be violated, and ceasefire actually doesn't mean peace. It can mean wars can restart, and therefore they want to have a peace agreement. Now, if they have that goal, then it was never the goal of Zelensky. It was never the goal of Europe. Therefore, there's going to be a lot of pressure on both Zelensky and Europe to actually speak out their mind and think seriously about what has been put on the table in terms of whatever they have discussed, Putin and Trump at Alaska, which is no NATO membership, limitation to the armed forces that Ukraine can have post the agreement, some swap of exchange of territories, etc., etc. So on this discussion will take place. And I think there's very little room for maneuver on the part of Zelensky and the Europeans. But at the same time, they will do everything to delay this process, get it involved in more and more negotiations and clarifications and everything else. And therefore, it's not going to happen during this visit. But the outline for the future would be laid during the visit, and Trump would then know, and his entourage would know how serious Zelensky and Europeans are actually to accept the goals of the Americans, of Trump, to begin the process of normalization of ties with Russia.
And everyone's also waiting to see if there's going to be a trilateral meeting involving Zelensky, Trump and Putin anytime in the foreseeable future. Well, that's all the time we have on the show. Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you, sir, for your time.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
All right. So that all-important meeting between Zelensky and Trump is going to take place shortly in Washington. What's going to come of it? Can we see a breakthrough being achieved? That's a million-dollar question. Watch this space for more. This is me, Neha Khanna, signing off. Thanks for watching.